So Anne-Marie asked me to come to speak this morning about a concept that I've worked with a fair amount, which is nature and meaning of beauty, and how that works for our sanctification. So I'm going to talk for about half an hour, which reminds me that I need to get a timepiece because I like to talk. We talk a lot. So we'll talk about half an hour, and then we'll get some questions. Men, said the 20th century American poet Dorothy Parker, men seldom make passes at women with glasses. And there, believe it or not, I think we actually have a pretty good statement of the difficulty in the 20th and 21st century that we have about beauty. Beauty, as just kind of we commonly, colloquially associate it and think of the term, that we're obsessed with it, right? Think about all of these, being of course an esthetician, so a beautician means somebody who deals with very expensive makeup and technical processes for making women particularly appear more beautiful, this and that. There's this whole complex thing that if you watch sort of like extreme makeover shows that sometimes I get forced into watching when I'm visiting people's houses, you'll see this. There's a complex dynamic because there's this awareness of the seriousness of people say like body shaming or fat shaming. You know that you're more than a kind of standard definition of beauty, that everyone is beautiful, but at the same time, fat people are awful, and your body has to be exactly perfect, and if you don't fit this exact body type, there's something terribly wrong with you. So there's this terrible tension in kind of contemporary popular culture where we just can't figure out what I'm supposed to do with the concept of beauty. And that's just this kind of very existential lived experience of beauty in the human body, particularly the female body. And then what do I do with that? And what do I do with beauty in the rest of the world? So we're already stuck in this very complex situation. Is beauty good to be taken seriously, or is it actually a distraction from a more important part of life? Now, I'm happy to tell you that this problem only gets worse the more that you look into it, which is great. In fact, I'm happy to tell you that it's actually one of the most defining problems of the 20th century, particularly the 20th century's approach to the question of beauty, is whether beauty is all that beautiful after all. So let me propose to you two different views on beauty from prominent thinkers. So one is that there's a Dada artist, this kind of school of sort of nonsense art in the early 20th century, Richard Huelsenbeck, who said in 1917, so right in the sort of fury of World War I, Goethe and Schiller, two major philosophers of beauty in the 19th century, Goethe and Schiller and beauty added up to killing and bloodshed and murder. It's a strong statement. That's what the concept of beauty gets us to, is World War I. That's his point. A different or similar statement from that perspective is from a major aesthetic philosopher in the 20th century called Theodor Adorno. He said, art must take up the cause of what is proscribed as ugly, though no longer in order to integrate or mitigate it or reconcile it with its own existence through humor that's more offensive than anything repulsive. Rather, in the ugly, art must denounce the world that creates and reproduces the ugly in its own image. If you've ever looked at a modern art exhibit or contemporary art exhibit and thought to yourself, like, boy, what? Like, how did this fall out of the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down? This is actually the idea. Adorno was he wasn't the only influence, but he was a major influence in the shaping of kind of modern and contemporary art. And it's that whole idea that taking up from Hosenbeck, that beauty is a kind of an oppressive shackle that we have to throw off, in order to be able to do real art and actually work for the good of society. A totally opposing view comes from Dostoevsky. He has this very famous line in his novel The Idiot, where one character says, "Beauty will save the world." So that's about as strong of a contrast as you can get. Either the notion of beauty caused World War I and is a major tool of oppression of governing majorities onto kind of human experience, the authentic human experience, or it'll save the world. This is, believe it or not, really, men seldom make passes at women with glasses. It's just like, well, I'm obsessed with beauty, but actually beauty, maybe I want to reject it, but maybe not. By the way, Dorothy Parker never wore her glasses in public. She had to wear glasses. So even though she knew that this was ridiculous, she never wore her glasses in public. Anyway, just to say. So my point here, and I swear I have one, is that humanity has received a vocation from God to beauty. We have a divine vocation to beauty. That the goal of human life is that we may each individually be made beautiful by the beauty of the all-beautiful one, to contemplate his beauty eternally. That, just putting it out there right now, that's what I believe we're doing here. So how do we get from the one to the other? How do we get from this complex, fraught sense of beauty to this kind of glorious, poetic notion of being transformed by beauty, which I'm going to point out later is not mere poetry. I mean this quite literally. So first we have to ask, what actually is beauty? That's one of the hilarious things when you start reading and hearing and talking about people talking about beauty, is you realize that they just throw the word around like it doesn't, like whatever, it just means whatever I like. Oh, great, that's helpful. But let's look at it a little more concretely. So what does beauty mean? Well, first we start with where all things start, which is in God, right? So it's already just important to say that beauty is an aspect of God himself. So we can say a few things about God just that we learn from observation of the world around us, that we learn by our reason alone, that are said properly and specifically of God, and then, believe it or not, because they're said about God, we say them about other things. So we say that God is good, that he is true, he is, Jesus says this, right, that I am the truth, that why do you call me good? No one is good but the Father. That because God is good, we're able to say other things are good. So it's been simply and primarily about God. Beauty is the same way, actually. Beauty is said simply and primarily about God. God's beauty is his truth, is his goodness. It's simply what it means to be God, viewed under different aspects, is that he's beautiful. All right, so it's common to the divine persons, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's common to the divine nature, often spoken about particularly as the Son, that the Son is beauty for us. I wrote a 100-page essay about that, which I will not bore you with right now, but it's interesting. And it's how we can say, in a real way, the Trinitarian life is beautiful. They share beauty among them. The persons of the Trinity share beauty among them. But ultimately, that's really kind of all we can say. I could go on about certain philosophical considerations about what exactly beauty is considered in the abstract, but ultimately we're left with this beautiful line that St. Augustine says. He says, "What kind of beauty does God's wisdom have? Through it, all those things that appeal to our eyes are beautiful, and to see it, to embrace it, our hearts need to be cleansed. We profess ourselves its lovers, so it sets us to rights, so that we may not fail to please it." But that's really all we say. Isn't that interesting? You say, what kind of beauty does God's wisdom have? We don't really know. It's just there. But this is the critical thing. We profess ourselves its lovers, so it sets us to right. To see it, our hearts need to be cleansed. This is already, in this first quote from St. Augustine, giving the whole game away. Because in order to see God's beauty, we have to be made like God, which means we have to be made beautiful, like God is beautiful by God's own beauty. That's what it means to have our hearts cleansed, to learn more about it. We see and we know, because we're able to experience it internally. So that is, already I'm going to say, just giving the whole game away. What is God's beauty? I can't really tell you. It's who God is himself. I can't put that into words. But as we come closer to him, we begin to know it and live it more deeply. In heaven, this is going to be a big beauty party. I'm going to tell you that right now. So that's God. That's beauty in God, right? Okay, that's great. Now, what about beauty in the world around us, which, of course, is sort of more commonly associated with that reality? So there's a beautiful line from Psalm 21, I think. 29, sorry. The heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. There's this whole idea that runs throughout the Psalms and through much of the Bible, that we look at the world, and the world sings the praises of God. The world proclaims his beauty. St. Augustine, again, says that God is the beauty of all beautiful things. So there's a way that in just looking at the world around us, we can see beauty. We can't really deny it, right? So, but what do we actually mean by that beauty? Well, ultimately, it's that God gives each creature the ability, which is creature, just anything he's made, right? The ability to become beautiful, its own proper beauty, and then the drive to realize its own proper beauty in God. That's to say that beauty, when we think about something in the world with respect to its beauty, what we're doing, if we're thinking about it properly, is we're considering the way that this thing has come from God, who has conceived it beautifully in his mind, is what it is, flourishes in its reality as in God, and then ends in God, has a kind of a termination, a direction towards God again. For inanimate creatures, it obviously doesn't mean that a rock is sort of sitting there being like, oh God, I love you. Although that would be hilarious. But no, its purpose ends in God in a way that we'll see a little bit in a moment. So that's beauty then is actually an aspect of what it means for something to be. That a thing is beautiful because it is what it is, because it is exactly what it's supposed to be. And because of this, it points to God, because if a thing has a supposed to be, then there's someone who gave it that supposed to be, right? Otherwise, it just is what it is, you know. So in that a thing is what it is, it kind of points already to the one who designed it, to the one for whom it is made, which is God. So now there's an interesting point here that beauty is also something that we experience, right? So we can say that objectively speaking, there's beauty in the world around us, something being what it is being from God and being back to God. But it's also something that we experience, right? This subjective element that I see and I experience beauty. So it's a kind of aesthetic contemplation. You know, we see beauty and can be changed by it. Interestingly, the experience of beauty is the most all-consuming event in the human experience. That it involves the whole mind and the whole person working with the senses, right? Because beauty is always taken in through the senses in some way or another, and it involves the love that we have and the knowledge that we have all together with the senses of our body, engaged in the same object, which is looking at the beautiful thing. That's basically unique in the human experience. And so in a certain way, it's man's highest natural act, like the most elevated thing that we can do without the help of grace, is to look at beauty and be kind of enraptured by beauty. it's particularly notable that when something is good, I want to have it, right? Like if I see cake, like I'm not satisfied with like the abstract existence of the cake. I'm gonna eat that, and that's how I know it's good. It's because I can eat it, right? I have to possess it. Where something beautiful, it's totally different. There's no desire to consume with it. There's just like when you're looking at the Grand Canyon, you're not like, how can I fit this Grand Canyon in my pocket and take it home? You're just there experiencing it. So there's this kind of purity of its non-possessiveness. Is this experience of beauty. But now we need to look at more excitingly, perhaps equally excitingly, is beauty in human beings, right? This gets us back to Dorothy Parker, which is fun. So now we need to look at what are we actually talking about when we talk about beauty in human beings? It should be clear enough that physical beauty, the beauty of appearance, is not the final good for which human beings are made. It doesn't fulfill and sum up the purpose of our existence. But there is a beauty about humanity that is actually the purpose of our existence, and that's that God made human beings for himself to actually share in the divine life, to be united with him in heaven. So that whole dynamic reality of beauty, coming from God, being what it is in God, and going back to God, that's in everything, is much more radical in human beings because we have freedom and self-awareness and knowledge and all of that, knowledge and love, that we come from God in a very particular way, unlike a rock or a tree or an animal or what have you. Each individual human being comes from God as being directly created at the moment of conception, being directly created by a special act of God. Not way at the beginning of time or outside of time, but right at that moment, God creates that individual soul. So it comes from God very radically and directly. And through the experience of our life, we grow in flourishing as God has made us to be, as experiencing already in this life a unity with the Lord, a direction to him, that then we hope by the grace of God at the end of our lives and at the end of time, terminates in the unity with him in heaven, right? So that reality, as much as our life is reflecting that movement, is the extent to which we are fulfilling, we are being beautiful, we are being made beautiful, and we are living a beautiful life. So you see, it's very interesting that it would be a huge mistake to derogate or reject like physical beauty as being totally just like bad or something we shouldn't even talk about, because in fact it is a perfection. It's not, it has no moral weight, but it is important in a certain way. So that's what it is. It's a good that some people possess in greater natural abundance than others, and that's just that. We're all very familiar with some people having more things than we have and less things than we have and all of that. So that's just how the physical aspect of beauty is. But it's a pointer towards something much more astounding, which is the flourishing of the human person in grace, in the love of God that comes from God, and the life that comes from God. So it's interesting. We speak in theology. It's present in the Bible that man is not just made in the image of God, but to the image of God. So this is an interesting idea. If God is beauty itself, beauty himself, and we are made toward that image, we shouldn't be surprised that us living our lives in grace, in struggles with virtue and everything else, should become being more beautiful, become being more to the image of the beautiful one. And that is in fact precisely what we find, that human life is in fact a process of beautification. In fact, it's often more splendid because one of the interesting things about physical beauty, of course, is that it doesn't last all that long, ordinarily speaking. I mean, sometimes it does, but not all that long. It can it shifts and changes modes, and it in some ways becomes less recognizable as we age. Where the beauty of the whole human person, everything about us, should be growing as we age in life, because if by the grace of God we're allowing ourselves to be transformed internally by who God is and who God is for us. Our life, all of our habits, our experiences can be being integrated more and more by the vision that God has for us, by who we are in God's creative will, you know. This is so interesting. So St. Thomas Aquinas says about the full beauty that belongs to human beings, that it consists in a man's conduct or actions being well proportioned in respect of the spiritual clarity of reason, which is what he means by honesty, which is the same thing as a virtue. So it's a virtue that moderates, according to reason, all that's connected with man. And this is why it's important that physical beauty is a treasure to understand and respect for what it is without deifying it, without making it like God, because ultimately the physical beauty has to, among other things, has to do with being well proportioned. These sort of interesting studies about balance of symmetry in the face and that kind of stuff. Well, that good proportion, that being well proportioned, is a helpful pointer actually to a more important notion of true proportion, being well balanced and in good proportion, that is actually proper to the human person. So obviously, beautiful or the less beautiful person doesn't necessarily have more or less of the true beauty of the well proportioned life. But it's an indicator, like, oh, wait a second, that's where beauty consists for human beings. It's in this kind of balance of virtue and of offering the self to God. Now, I've let myself go on a bit, and there is a lot more here, but I don't want to hold this here forever. So I think what I'd like to talk about, and we can move on to, is this this interesting thing that St. Augustine calls the beautiful exchange. He speaks, it's my phrase, I'm adapting Augustine's. Augustine talks about, when he's talking about the incarnation, he says, o admirabile commercium, a wonderful exchange, a marvelous exchange, by which God becomes in Jesus Christ poor to be poor, so that we who are poor might become rich. He becomes lowly and a slave, so that we who are lowly and slaves might become lords. It's this incredible inversion, what Jesus takes on our state so that we can take on his, not by nature, not by right, not by something we can lay claim to and say this is mine, but as a gift that we receive from God. And when we're talking about beauty, it's really important to attend to that, because of course, if the beauty for which that defines what being a human being is, what we're made for, is this sort of flourishing of the human person into and towards God, being shaped in his image, then it doesn't take a lot of honesty with ourselves to realize that this is something that we fall from all the time. You know, that there's a sort of like a hot mess dropped into the middle of this, and we just have to acknowledge that, in fact, what we mean by sin is ugliness, basically. That sin is actually what makes us ugly. You know, that it tears us away from the flourishing of the beauty for which we were made. And so it actually makes us ugly. Which is in fact partly why, if you think about like in novels or in movies, there's a particular kind of stock character of usually a woman, but sometimes a man, a very beautiful person who is deeply wicked, right? So the reason that's a stock character is because it's this total betrayal, right? So that that the exterior so completely is a lie about the interior. And that's why, because sin itself is ugliness, right? And so when we see someone who's externally beautiful, you want to think, oh, is this person internally beautiful? Maybe not. But in any case, that's why there's this sort of automatic notion in the human person about that. It's because sin makes us ugly. And we just have to admit that means that there's a lot of ugliness in our lives that's often caused by ourselves and maybe caused by other people, things outside of our control. So what do we do with that? Well, this is where the beautiful exchange comes in. St. Augustine says, Christ comes to be made ugly in order to make humanity beautiful. As he comes to his bride in her ugliness, that she might not remain ugly. He rid her of her ugliness and formed beauty in her. So he's particularly emphasizing that he's drawing out from not only the lowly condition of Christ as he came into the world, but particularly the suffering of the cross that Isaiah says we saw no loveliness in him, and we think about the beatings and the scourgings and the torture and the fact that no one maintains any degree of comeliness in such a horrible death. That Augustine's really playing on that our salvation, our unity with God, which is the most beautiful possible imaginable thing, is achieved in the ugliest possible moment conceivable, beyond actually what's conceivable, which is that the incarnate Son of God himself being disfigured, physically disfigured by torture and pain and death. So it's the ugliness of that shockingly becomes the font of beauty for human beings. So here's a line I can't resist quoting in full from St. Augustine because it's simply too beautiful to quote, to cut down. He says, "Let us, therefore, who believe, run to meet a bridegroom who is beautiful wherever he is. Beautiful as God, as the Word who is with God. He is beautiful in the Virgin's womb, where he did not lose his Godhead, but assumed our humanity. Beautiful he is as a baby, as the Word unable to speak. Because while he was still without speech, still a baby in arms and nourished at his mother's breasts, the heavens spoke for him. A star guided the Magi, and he was adored in the manger as food for the humble. He was beautiful in heaven then, and beautiful on earth. Beautiful in the womb, and beautiful in his parents' arms. He was beautiful in his miracles, but just as beautiful under the scourges. Beautiful as he invited us to life, but beautiful too in not shrinking from death. Beautiful in laying down his life, and beautiful in taking it up again. Beautiful on the cross, beautiful in the tomb, and beautiful in heaven." So we might ask then, how does this human beautification, which is our sanctification, take place? Well, it's the life of grace. It's grace that does it. When Thomas Aquinas is speaking about what grace is and does, it's what enables man to participate in the divine nature after the manner of a likeness through a certain regeneration or recreation. That is to say, that when we receive grace from the Lord, what we mean actually by the word grace is a participation, a sharing in who God is. That's what we mean by the word grace. So in our prayer, in our Christian life, in our offering of our works, of our deeds, of our sufferings, of our receipt of the sacraments, staying close to God, we are actually becoming greater sharers in our knowledge and love of God, in who he is, in his own nature, in his own likeness. And that shapes us with the beauty of God itself. It heals our wounds of sin, heals the ugliness that sin has wrought in us, and elevates us with beauty, elevates us to be like God himself in his own beauty. John Paul II, in his letter to artists, said, "Not all are created to be artists in the specific sense of the term. Yet, as Genesis has it, all men and women are entrusted with the task of crafting their own life. In a certain sense, they are to make of it a work of art, a masterpiece. That's exactly what we need. Not because I'm so amazing and I have these amazing technical skills by which I sort of do everything just exactly right, but by offering my life more and more to God, by being more and more honest about where ugliness has crept in, where I've let it creep in, by just inviting Christ more and more into our life, being more identified with the beautiful one, we ourselves become beautiful. Our life becomes a work of art. It becomes a masterpiece. The last word I'd like to leave with is this stunning example of exactly what that looks like. So the perfect example of this kind of beautified life, of course, is the Blessed Mother. And Dante, as a man who does all things well, captures this perfectly towards the very end of the Paradiso in the Divine Comedy. He says about his heavenly vision, he says, "I saw millions of angels reveling, each one distinct in splendor and in art. And as they play in heaven, and as they sing, such beauty smiles upon them, that for each saint to behold is utter ravishing." He uses beauty as a substantive, as a noun here, as a title. He's talking about Mary. This is the culmination of his great praise of the Blessed Virgin in heaven. Is he says, he doesn't even name her with the name that we ordinarily know her by. He names her beauty. Beauty smiles on them, such that for each saint to behold is utter ravishing. That's what we're talking about. Such a radical identification of the person who each of us truly is, with the beauty that comes from God, the life of grace, with aspects of God's own nature, his goodness and his truth, alive in our hearts, that we become, in a sense, substantively identified with God's own beauty. You know, that we can say of Mary that she is the beauty who smiles upon us, not because the beauty is her own possession, that it can be conceived of separately from God, but because she's so openly a channel to what she receives from God and passes on to others, that we can speak of her as beauty, you know. And that is actually, although in a lesser degree for each of us, what we're called to as well. That's actually our vocation to holiness, is this vocation to the beauty of sanctity, the beauty of holiness. So in conclusion, I'd just like to close with this wonderful quote from St. Augustine, who sees in this call to beauty the call to conversion. He says, "The devil begot you as an ugly child when he made you a sinner. But God, who justifies the ungodly, gives you new birth as a beautiful creature. Forget your own people and your Father's house." Thank you.